Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to the second session of the Rethinking Pakistan Forum. I have the privilege of opening today's discussion on behalf of Arif Shahid, President of the PSA Coalition and Chair of RPF, who unfortunately is unable to join us today due to his health. Arif has been the driving force behind this initiative, and while he can't be with us today, his vision and commitment to fostering critical discourse continue to guide RPF. He sends his best wishes and deep gratitude to all of you for being here. The Rethinking Pakistan Forum is more than just a discussion platform. It is a movement dedicated to challenging conventional narratives, fostering bold ideas, and crafting actionable solutions for Pakistan's most pressing issues. We believe that meaningful change comes from collaborative efforts that bridge academia, policy, entrepreneurship. And this session is a testament to that vision. Today, we focus on digital Pakistan, technology, transformation, and entrepreneurship, a conversation that couldn't be more timely. As Pakistan grapples with the challenges of economic recovery and social development, the rise of digital innovation and entrepreneurship presents a transformative opportunity. Today, we are bringing together industry leaders and trailblazers and trailblazing entrepreneurs to discuss the critical intersections of technology, policy, reform, and entrepreneur ventures in reshaping Pakistan's economic and social trajectory. We aim to discuss how digital solutions can address systemic challenges, expand financial inclusion, and unlock untapped potential across sectors. We will also shed light on the hurdles faced by entrepreneurs, from funding constraints to regulatory bottlenecks, while highlighting the policy measures and innovative ideas needed to foster sustainable growth. Unfortunately, Mr. Rabil Warith is unable to join us today due to illness. While his insights will be greatly missed, we are all hoping for his swift recovery. Nonetheless, we're privileged to have a stellar panel featuring Kalsoom Lakhni, Mubarak Siddiqui, and Hamza Jawed, leaders at the forefront of Pakistan's startup and investment ecosystem. Their insights today will help us understand how digital transformation can drive economic growth, financial inclusion, and sustainable development. I will now take a moment to formally introduce our esteemed panelists before we begin our discussion. Kalsoom Lakhni is the co-founder and general partner at the I2I Ventures, an early-stage venture capital fund for Pakistan, and the country's first female-founded VC fund. Kalsoom is also the founder of the Invest to Innovate, a sister entity that she launched in 2011 to support and unleash the potential of young entrepreneurs and growth markets. Mubarak Siddiqui is a carbon lawyer and founder of Carbon Law, a provider of legal and commercial services to investors and startups. Moreover, he works on policy initiatives to facilitate foreign investment and innovative early-stage business. Finally, Hamza Jawed is the co-founder of Bazaar Technologies, a leading e-commerce and financial services platform that provides low pricing on all essentials. He studied at the London School of Economics and pursued consulting at McKinsey & Company. The discussion will be moderated by Myra Ahmed, the RPF's Vice Chair of Research, Policy and Initiatives, Nabiha Ahmed, RPF Vice Chair for Programs, and Abuzar Suhaib, RPF's Director of Student and Youth Initiatives and board member. Without further ado, I will now hand over to Myra, Nabiha, and Abuzar to initiate our moderated segment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lina. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. Hamza, Kalsoom, Mubarak, thank you all so much for your time. This is a policy area that I personally am particularly passionate about, so it is truly an honor to have the country's foremost practitioners discuss this with us today. So to kick off our discussion, I want to start with a question that speaks directly to the role that technology, transformation, and entrepreneurship can play on a macro level. Pakistan has seen traditional economic models really struggle to deliver widespread prosperity, leaving many gaps in social, political, and economic development. And that makes it very critical to explore new pathways for progress. So in the context of Pakistan, how can digitalization, innovation, and entrepreneurship help drive meaningful change? And could this be the way that we finally break the cycle and create more inclusive growth? So I'll start with Hamza, and then Kalsoom, and then Mubarak, please.
Thank you, Myra. Thank you, RPF, for having us over. I think being at the center stage of trying to create a technology company in Pakistan, and been at it for about 4.5 years, close to 5 years. At the start and increasingly every year, I have felt more and more optimistic about what technology can do to improve meaningfully the outcomes for Pakistanis across the board, but also enable efficiency, growth, and fulfillment for young talent in the country. Um, a quick stat, 2/3 of Pakistan is under the age of 30. Our median age is 22. Median age for China is 45. And so whatever we do as stakeholders, as policymakers, as government, there is a fundamental change that will come in Pakistani society when this median age or people at this current median age grow up and become active members of the economy, of the society, of the community. Um, we know, it's general wisdom that the younger crowd is a lot more digital savvy. They want ease, they want convenience, they want quick ways of getting done and accomplishing things. And so, no matter what happens, whether the country is stable, it's unstable, whether the political economy is not doing well, these consumers, when they become key stakeholders, there will be a massive digitization phase in the country, and that's how we're really set up. If you take the past 5 years in the country, and many observers would say that Pakistan has gone through a boom and bust cycle in the past 5 years. But at the same time, there are two things that have grown at double digits. Whether you look at value, whether you look at volume, whether you look at dollar, whether you look at PKR, it's grown at double digits. And those two things are digital payments and e-commerce. And that's exactly the reason why, when these consumers are becoming key stakeholders of the community, no matter what happens, the pie of digitization is increasing. And there are many such examples of small and large companies taking advantage, but also leading the charge in doing that. When you look at digital wallets, when you look at branchless banking, when you look at D2C brands, when you look at logistics startups, when you look at funding as well. I mean, the past couple of years has been tough, but within the last 5 years, we had two of the best years for venture capital funding in Pakistan, and most of that was foreign money. And when you see China, India, Southeast Asia, Latin America, the US, those investment opportunities are a lot more niche in AI and deep tech and biotech. But in Pakistan, even the standard stuff like e-commerce, logistics, fintech is still up for grabs. And so with a little bit of money coming in and with the talent that we have, we will be able to create those massive outsized outcomes for the country. And so I'm very, very hopeful.
Very good to know. Perfect. Kulsoom, can we hear from you next, please?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Hamza said. I think the only thing to add to that, right, is that, it's there. I think there is an inevitability when it comes to digitization. It's happening anyway, right? Regardless of whether or not we have ceilings on things or whether or not, barriers exist, like digitization, innovation, all of those things exist in this environment. It's more of a sense of how are we enabling it? Like, what are the things that we're putting in place that allows that to happen unimpeded? And I think that's the bigger challenge here. But I think, what I've seen also working in the market now for about 13 years in this space, is that, regardless of all the problems, if anything, the problems always become opportunities for people to solve. We've seen that with what Hamza is building with Bazaar. We've seen that with so many companies here. And I think Pakistan is ripe for that right now, that technology innovation can actually solve for so many problems, especially in traditional industry, right? So we've seen that in terms of even just like creating efficiency in different industries that we've seen, value chains, supply chains, every single sector is ripe for disruption. And so it is inevitable in a lot of ways, especially given to what Hamza was saying about how young our population is. The bigger thing for me, and I think we'll get into this in the discussion, is about how are we creating the environment that allows that to happen in a more efficient way, in a better way, and one that allows like everyone to succeed. But I think it's always exciting, right? Whenever, for me, I've always been the type of person that whenever there's been problems or challenges, it's important from an entrepreneurial perspective to see that as opportunities. And I think Pakistan has a lot of that.
Amazing. Perfect. Mubarak, can we just hear from you next and then we'll move
Yeah, I
on?
mean, not a whole lot to add after Hamza and Kulsoom have like pretty much summed it up well. Sorry, one
We took
second.
all the good stuff. You have nothing left.
Yeah. In the sense that, so one thing that I've noticed is that we've left some of our biggest problems for so long that new technology will just help us leapfrog into the best solutions, right? So when we could not fix transmission for all of Pakistan, now solar is cheap enough to go and install solar in remote villages. We don't need to go and build those transmission like that transmission infrastructure. Similarly, with internet infrastructure, while we could not build the actual fiber optic cables in time, we now have like satellite internet, which is now pretty good, pretty decent, which will help us reach those Pakistanis. So absolutely, I think we are just like at the right time as well, where we have a huge young population, and with excess electricity, and with new technology where we can get internet to remote areas really quick, leapfrogging all the infrastructure that was needed on all this time. There's like Kulsum said, there's an inevitability around it, right? And it has to happen. Most of our consumption patterns have to move to digital channels because it will be easier, it will be quicker, it will be cheaper, like Hamza said. So yeah, I think it's just more of a question of when now, as opposed to whether it will happen or not.
Wonderful. That was a really great way to, I think, kick off our discussion. And I think from what we've just heard, it's evident that digitalization is not really just an opportunity, it's almost a necessity for Pakistan's economic future. And that brings us perfectly to our first major theme, which is unlocking the digital economy's potential. So Kulsum, I'm going to start with you on this one and, take you back in time a little. So between 2016 and 2018, Pakistani startups were averaging just around $10 million a year in VC funding, which was around just 1/3 of our GDP. But by 2021, we saw a very dramatic shift with technology startups themselves raising over $350 million. You are a trailblazer in Pakistan's venture capital space, and you have a dual vantage point because you work on ecosystem building, but also on hands-on investing. So in your opinion, what was it that changed to enable the startup boom in 2021, in particular in terms of digital factors, so like the rise of 3G and 4G, the enablement of digital payments, etc. Do you think these were significant in enabling startup activity, and which factors would you really point to as those enablers?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's, 2021 and 2022, and Bazaar was one of the big startups raising a lot of money as part of those numbers, right? So I think what's important is that that number has dramatically come down now too. So while we can freeze those 2 years in time, but then it's also important to kind of put it in the context of what normal looks like. I don't think 2021 and 2022, 2021 and 2022, I don't think that was the normal. But what I think is interesting is that it happened. There was like a lot of different levers that needed to be in place that happened all at the same time, right? So number one, obviously we were in the middle of the pandemic. All of a sudden investors, and I'm sure this was the case for you, Hamza, a lot of investors who would typically travel for diligence didn't have to anymore. They were doing diligence. They were doing calls from, San Francisco to Karachi, from all over the world and making decisions virtually, right? And so that lowered one barrier because before, at least when I was working in the market, coming to Pakistan was a bit of a challenge. And now we have had VCs that come to the market quite often, but I think that was something that lowered a barrier for a lot of a lot of international VCs that were writing first-time checks into Pakistan. The second thing is there was, when it came to interest rates being low, liquidity being high, we saw, international VC activity tick up in pretty much every market. And we saw that inflation. So Pakistan was not alone in this. If anything, when you compare our numbers to, neighboring emerging markets that were maybe further along, that number is actually relatively lower. But it still was obviously significantly higher for us in comparison to what we've done in the past. But, as a result, you had a lot of international VCs that had a lot of liquidity that wanted to put their money somewhere. Pakistan is a relatively untapped market. And pretty much most founders that were coming into the market at that time, and I was seeing, and I think we've actually studied this in our ecosystem study that came out around this time, was that there was a lot of people that were moving back to Pakistan to start companies, right? But not just moving back and starting it. They were coming from places like McKinsey, like Hamza, but also like Kareem. After Kareem just had their acquisition, we saw a huge amount of people moving back and starting businesses, but also who had a lot of professional experience in terms of working in these companies, right? But they were also building businesses where there was a comparable in another market that allowed international VCs to understand what they were building, right? So even if they didn't understand the market, they were like, well, this is the X of, this is what, what we were seeing in India was already built, or Indonesia that was already built, allowed them to make things much more palatable for them. And then the last thing from a regulatory perspective, and Mabaraz was a big part of this, is that certain regulations changed that allowed for the ceilings of certain industries and certain spaces to just kind of lift, right? So number one, if before a lot of startups that were raising money before, if you were raising from outside investors, would set up a company abroad, and it wasn't technically allowed, and Mabaraz can speak to this before the regulations changed. But it was kind of like, don't ask for ask for permission, don't ask for permission, just like tell them about it later. But the change that allowed for startups to set up holding companies abroad was a game changer, right? All of a sudden, international investors did not have to put money directly into the market. The big question of how to get money out, which is the number one question VCs asked, it's the number one question we get asked as a fund, was solved for, right? And then we saw with the state bank, SECP, the sandbox, we saw a lot of regulation changes that really kind of lifted the ceiling in the fintech sector, which is why we've seen fintech as a space dramatically take off, even though the opportunity was there before. Even right now, if you look at the numbers for 2024, and also 2023, like it used to be much higher concentration in e-commerce, and now we've actually seen a much larger concentration of funding in fintech. So I think when you look at it from those different factors, all of that kind of came together. And there's probably more that I'm missing at this point, but that kind of gives you a good, I think, summary of all the different things that happen to happen at the same time. That does not speak to the challenges that we're seeing from 2023 onwards, but it does kind of speak to that bubble that happened back then.
That was really insightful. And I think you gave us a very holistic overview that I think is beneficial for all of us as well. I will just say at this point that please feel free to jump in, either of you at any point, if you'd like to sort of build upon anyone's points. Mobiles, I want to shift a little bit towards policy now. And digitalization has been a very prominent buzzword in Pakistan's policy-making landscape, as Kulsoom was also highlighting. It first gained traction with the Digital Pakistan initiative in 2019, which introduced the Roti Kapra Makan, or internet vision. And at the time, I remember this felt like a transformative moment for the country. But ultimately, its implementation really highlighted the systemic challenges that often hinder progress in Pakistan. So I want to therefore flip the conversation a little to ask how you think digitalization can be leveraged to implement more efficient policy and governance. Digital public infrastructure has been at the center of a lot of conversations recently, and it was very central to things like the Benazir Income Support Program and cash transfers during COVID-19. So how would you say government can leverage digitalization to improve policy?
So yesterday I was speaking to someone who was working with Balochistan government to help improve their health outcomes, right? With the health department. And they were just talking about bureaucracy being, if they wanted to give extra fuel to the vaccination team, how do you help give them actual extra fuel? And just within that, there were so many layers of bureaucracy within it just to help you. So my point is, and they've been trying for 6 months to make sure that the vaccinator or the team that goes around vaccinating kids can get those, say, I think it's 20 liters a month extra fuel. So it's kind of ridiculous how much bureaucracy gets in the way. Absolutely. Listen, if anything is digital, it just, number one, I think primary, like corruption happens whenever there is human discretion. The less discretion there is, the less opportunity to be corrupt or less opportunity to delay things, and less leverage with whoever has to make a decision, right? That's number one. Number two, inefficiency also happens whenever there's human discretion, because even if you're completely honest, even if you mean well, if you have to make a decision, which is, say, utilize government money, you want to do it by checking all the boxes, crossing all the T's, dotting all the I's, right? And that inevitably leads to delay, which inevitably leads to us not being able to achieve our outcomes. Digitization is actually the way we will solve for it. Now, there's so many aspects to it. Like, is the Pakistani government enabling new digital businesses is a completely separate thing, as opposed to how they can improve their own functions with digitization. So if you're just talking about businesses, I think the recent most encouraging development is the Digital Pakistan Authority that they've just built. They just passed the act 2 days ago, and there's work being done to build the Pakistan stack, which we saw in India was transformative, right? Which has an identity layer, it has a payments layer, and then there's other layers to help make sure that you can transact easily online. Then there's also Rast, which came about couple of years ago, which I feel over the years will also be transformative. We've seen State Bank actually give two of those. दूसरा दिया है अभी तक नहीं दिया, but I don't know. But they've started giving those digital banking licenses, right? Like they've officially been issued. So there is movement on that front. I can't. Like, can it be quicker? Can it be more efficient? Yeah, of course. But while all that is happening on the social media front, censorship has led to like all sorts of creators and all sorts of people losing out on that. But lastly, before we move on, I think one area where we are just like, I think, irrationally scared is crypto, where enabling regulation could be transformative for Pakistan. I'm not saying allow meme coins and or say the Tabdili coin in Pakistan, but the point is we can allow for crypto model, which are like around, say, this is tokenization of assets, which can be around stable coins. There's a whole lot that can be done there. And it's just this irrational fear of capital flight, which has prevented government of Pakistan from just allowing that enabling regulation on that front.
Yeah. Can I add one thing too to what Mabaraz was saying, which I think is important, is that I think one thing that's been a challenge on the digitization front is a lack of continuity. And so when you have like a regime change from a government standpoint, you just have just different, a different agenda, different priorities. And so all of a sudden, when you have a state bank that is extremely friendly to what's happening, all of a sudden that can shift, right? And so thinking through, like, from a digitization standpoint, like having that sense of a running thread of like the priorities staying the same, I think is really important to see from a digital economy perspective, to actually see things actually come to fruition, because I think oftentimes that's when you see barriers happen that didn't exist before, and that lack of being able to predict it from an investor standpoint becomes a major risk, right? Especially for outside investors.
That makes a lot of sense. And, I was reading a Tabadla report, which highlights how much Pakistan's digitalization is negatively impacted by how fragmented the system for that policy making is. And it's not necessarily a coherent pathway like the one that was employed in India, etc.
Myra, I think also when it comes to policy, I feel across the board there is an increasing buy-in that digitization solves a lot of the country objectives, the country problems. What are the major country problems at a government level? Number one, we have a huge undocumented economy, and you want to increase the tax net. Digitization is absolutely the answer to do that. If you have people accepting digital payments, if you have money coming through digital channels, you are documenting a larger part of the economy. The second problem we have is a current account deficit. I mean, we've seen when we had a technology VC or ecosystem boom in 2021, 2022 that we just talked about, we combined in 2 years had $600 million or more come in just to invest in technology startups. There is a lot of dry powder globally that's available to invest behind technology startups. So if you provide that avenue, we'll get the dollars as well the government desperately needs. Third is employment. For the young population that's going to come of age within the next few years, digitization again offers ample opportunity for employment. Bazaar, for example, in over 4.5 years, we've employed over 3,000 people because we are very people intensive in terms of delivery riders, in terms of fulfillment staff, in terms of software engineers. So there is a lot of answers, but at the same time, what is encouraging is there is buy-in and there is belief. Two things I can think of is one, if you go to a restaurant today and if you pay with cash, you have to pay 15% sales tax. If you pay with card, you pay 8% sales tax. So the government has realized that we will forego 7% of our revenue on your biryani bill just so that the restaurant can digitize. And that's a very good thing. I mean, and we take a lot of confidence from that. Second, today there's a circular that came out, and FBR is now mandating every single retailer to have card payments or RAS payment options. And so we see that there is realization. I just wish we could accelerate that realization and implementation of that policy.
Yeah, and also have policies that across the board. So as much as FBR's incentive is great, taxation policy generally for businesses is terrible, right? And so when you have one policy that makes sense and is enabling, have every like think about it from a broader approach or a broader structural approach of how do you actually enable innovation end to end, not just one thing that you do.
Perfect. And that actually leads me perfectly on to my next question for Hamza, which was essentially on what the impact of digitalization was for Bazaar, but more so, beyond the immediate benefits to your users, what are the multiplier effects of startups like Bazaar that digitize traditionally marginalized spaces? You've been on the ground, so, for you, how does digital transformation ripple out to create broader social, political, economic progress, whether that's financial inclusion for women, job creation, or even influencing policy reforms?
Yeah, I think a few things that I can think of. The other big problem that we have, especially for our the SME economy, is lack of easy financing. So if you think of a small merchant in a suburb of Karachi or Lahore, they have working capital needs, they have capex needs, they want to grow, they want to expand. But because A, they're not capable to document their business, B, they're not able to access the banking, and C, it's really cumbersome to even open a bank account, let alone apply for financing, their growth is capped. But we saw that once we digitized their business, once they started ordering from Bazaar for the inventory needs, we started to get a lot more data on them. And through that, we were able to provide a small Sharia compliant credit product. And once that worked, we see the stickiness, the attach rate, and the loss ratios are absolutely beautiful there. And then you realize that if you provide that kind of capital, and Pakistan is one of the least credit penetrated markets for SMEs. So that's one added advantage, that once you start bringing in these businesses or consumers into digital net, you enable easy financing. I think the second point that I just mentioned, digital payments, it helps the documentation of the economy, which helps the economy to grow, increase tax revenue, etc. The third thing is then for digitization, you need companies to build solutions, build products, innovate, etc. So again, you're really training the market. So Pakistani software engineers, about 25,000 software engineers graduate from computer science degrees. Typically in the past, what would happen is they would join a software house and build a 2-3 month project, go on Upwork, do some freelancing. But once you have these product companies come in because the VC money came in, these engineers are now working for problems for Pakistan. And so then you're really opening up the horizon of the software engineers who can then learn at a product company like Bazaar or many of the great startups that are out there, and then think of starting their own companies and solving problems in Pakistan. So these are some of the things that we see, and what we take most pride at Bazaar is one metric for success. Yes, it could be the exit, it could be the valuation, it could be the funding, it could be the growth. But for us, what is most important and close to mine and Saad's heart is how many people leave Bazaar and start their own companies. At this point, we're counting 5 ex-Bazaar colleagues who've gone and started companies or been very senior leadership at very early or pre-seed stage startups. And that exactly what gives me a lot more pride and hope. And we need to do a lot more here. I would expect, inshallah, hundreds of companies that come out of Bazaar alumni. And I don't think that's too far in the future.
That was thoroughly insightful. And I think what you mentioned, it actually speaks to a little bit of what the 2021 boom was stimulated by, was normative factors like the Kareem effect and how much that influenced entrepreneurship and startup activity. But thank you all so much for your detailed responses and for taking such a policy-centric approach to these issues. That was precisely the intention. And as we've highlighted, while there are many opportunities, there are also a number of barriers that require addressing. And that brings us perfectly on to our next segment, which is what is standing in the way of Pakistan's digital transformation. To take us through this segment, I'm now going to hand it over to Abu Zair Sahib to explore the financial, institutional, and regulatory barriers that are holding back progress. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Mayra.
Thanks, Mara.
As we just discussed digitalization and entrepreneurship, hold immense promise, but obviously like unlocking their full potential isn't without obstacles, especially in Pakistan. Regulatory challenges, financial constraints, institutional roadblocks continue to shape Pakistan's startup and investment landscape. So if we're going to build a resilient and digital economy, we need to understand these challenges in depth and explore how they can be addressed. Which brings me to theme 2, which is barriers to technology transformation and entrepreneurship. And I'll turn towards Mubarak first. And we spoke briefly about how regulatory and policy factors played a key role in shaping Pakistan's startup boom in 2021. We have been talking about it. And given your extensive work at the intersection of regulation, entrepreneurship, and investment, I'd like to delve a little deeper. आपने मुख्तसर अंदाज में इसके बारे में थोड़ी सी बात की है, लेकिन let's go a little deeper about could you shed more light on how regulation and policy shape startup activity and investment? Specifically, how has your work with the State Bank of Pakistan influenced this landscape? Secondly, in regards to digitalization, the past few weeks have been big on the regulation front. The Nation Pakistan Bill and the Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act have been regarded as landmark legislations that aim to transform Pakistan's digital society, economy, and governance. But many have commented on the impact these changes will have on the digital freedoms. I would like to ask, what is your assessment of these regulations as well?
So I'll start with the second one first, right? So PICA amendment is actually pretty horrible for Pakistan. I don't think there's any other way to put it. This is just another attempt at censoring, which just has far-reaching implications, right? Which just doesn't make our space good enough. And again, I keep saying, I think content is one of the few avenues of social mobility available to Pakistanis. It can really literally change people's lives entirely. Like a girl can record a video in which she's saying party ho rahi hai, and her life can change, transform completely in a month. There's not many avenues in Pakistan that offer that kind of social mobility or that kind of asymmetric outcome, right? So to curb the digital space, we are literally limiting that one avenue that we have left to change our outcomes. But anyway, so that's PICA. The Digital Nation Pakistan bill, like I spoke about earlier, is excellent infrastructure. We need that. We need to leverage the data that Nadra has. We all institutions in Pakistan need to be talking to each other. Currently, we are dealing with very different levels of digitization within the policy make, or we say within the regulators. SECP and State Bank are somewhat still more digitally savvy, but there's a lot of government departments that you would go to, and the officers will give you their email addresses, which are put on Yahoo or Gmail, and that's a whole different level that you have to deal with. So we still do not have centralized email for, say, all of provincial governments or say all of federal government. So there is that level of digitization that needs to happen to the bigger policies, right? But I think Digital Nation Pakistan, at least the intention is, and Dr. Sohail Munir, who's leading it or heading it, I think he's the right person to do it as well. He's done it in other markets too. So I hope he can implement it. I hope these things can just be, like, some things we would just leave and not politicize them, and everyone can agree on just, like, following them through. And I hope this would be one of them, because this is just infrastructure level stuff. Coming to your earlier question around investment and what kind of digitization policies help with it, I think Hamza spoke about having documented economy, right? The problem is that one of the big reasons why private equity never worked in Pakistan is because most of our businesses are not documented. They'd have two books, and that just creates this trust deficit, which does not allow for institutional capital to flow into those businesses. What that does is it leaves if you're going to operate in the undocumented sector, the capital that is available to you is also the undocumented capital. So if someone's willing to give you 5 crore rupees in cash, they need those 5 crore rupees and the profit back in cash. So your business has to stay undocumented to be able to do that as well, right? And one of the tragedies in Pakistan is that we jumped from super low risk, say investment, say real estate, listed securities, to the riskiest asset class in venture capital, and everything in the middle of the spectrum, which is private equity, growth capital, etc., just left completely ignored. I'm talking about the institutional front. So the continuum of capital hasn't developed yet, right? I'm just hoping with more like say enabling regulation. So, for example, State Bank allowing companies to open holding companies abroad, what that did was it helped Pakistani resident founders raise money without friction from, say, Sequoia, Kleiner Perkins, the biggest names, like as big as they get. Pakistani companies could get into Y Combinator more easily because they had specific restrictions around those 4 jurisdictions that they allow if you are to get into YC. So those barriers were removed, but again, for different kinds of businesses. But in terms of allowing more capital, I think it's less of a digitization problem, but more of enabling entrepreneurial finance problem. The market has failed, so that merits a government intervention, and that's where I think there've been some pretty elegant solutions that have worked in other markets where governments have worked with IFC, World Bank type of DFIs to set up fund of funds to the way we are like incubating and accelerating new companies. We need to do that with new funds. So my big thesis is that if you want to solve for the whole continuum of capital, we need like what 50, 60 new funds in Pakistan across the board, not just early stage and not just big PE. It has to be, so if you want to open a bunch of restaurants, if you want to open a retail thing, everyone should be able to get capital in there. Sorry, it's just been like a pretty broad answer across like, different things that I feel like need to be covered with this.
No, thank you so much. That is what we were hoping for, to delve a little deeper into these institutional issues. And with that, I'll turn my question towards Hamza, talking more about this. So you've previously observed that the traditional security concerns that were often cited as barriers to investment in Pakistan, geopolitical instability, regional tensions, and the like, no longer hold the same weight they once did in shaping investor confidence. Instead, what has emerged as a far more pressing issue is operational disruptions like internet outages. To what extent is Pakistan's entrenched practice of cutting internet access at the slightest upheaval hindering its economic progression? And in an era where digital infrastructure is as vital as physical infrastructure, and where investor confidence is increasingly tied to the stability of online ecosystems, how do you see this recurring pattern impacting Pakistan's ability to attract and retain investment?
Yeah, Wazir, I think that's a good point. I do feel that the frequent interruptions to internet, and usually the reasons that are cited are security, while they may be valid in many cases. The way I think of it is that Pakistan now has a sizable internet economy, whether it is freelancers or engineers or software houses building for global companies, or whether it is local companies, whether it's e-commerce, fintech, internet banking, logistics, etc. So there's a sizable economy that's based completely around internet. And so when there is a disruption, the economy is severely impacted. The way I think of it is, if you think of Pakistan's textile industry or the cement industry, which are pretty strategic industries for us as a country, they run on fuel, they run on electricity. And so imagine in a week or 2 days out of a week, internet, electricity or fuel is shut off to cement or textile factories in Pakistan. What will be the outcry from the states or the businessmen or the MNCs who operate in this sector? It will be horrific to see what the CEOs of those companies would say, or some of the chambers of commerce federation would say. So internet is exactly, we have billions of dollars of industry. Recently, we have a $3 billion export economy of technology services. Now imagine if you turn off the internet, it's exactly like turning off electricity or fuel to a large factory in one of the industrial hubs of Pakistan. So it is pretty damning. But at the same time, I do feel that this is not a big deterrent to investment. it is a big deterrent for founders, for companies and their motivations, and for our ability to digitize. For example, if I'm telling a Kiryana at Bazaar that, hey, buy all your inventory from us, it's affordable, it's convenient, and then one day my app is down because internet is down, they would need to always have a backup. And their buy-in or their belief will be hurt in terms of transferring over to a digital solution. So that is a pretty fundamental problem. But your specific question around investment, I think what hurts investment more is a lot more hard to solve as Pakistan. I mean, we could, probably stopping internet, but it still would not move the investment equation. What will move the investment equation is two things: is the broader brand of Pakistan as an investment destination, and second, it's the larger macroeconomic situation. So if you talk to investors, there are multiple foreign shareholders at Bazaar who I talk to on a regular basis, or there are prospective investors that we talk to and to see where the capital markets are. What they fear the most in a country like Pakistan is inflation, which leads to the currency devaluation. Because they're investing in dollars, their cost base is dollars, they need the returns in dollars. So if the current currency, the year that Bazaar raised our Series B, our PKR to dollar was 170. Today it's 270. And so those investors who had invested that year, in 2 years, if suddenly they're 40%, 50% down, even though Bazaar continues to perform. And so these are the things that deter investors a lot more than internet continuity. Internet continuity, of course, is a problem, but it's mostly a problem that is local for companies or consumers and employees, etc. But the macro situation has to be stable. Thankfully, though, for the past couple of years, our currency has been quite stable. And so if it stays like this for a few more years, we will, inshallah, see a lot more investment coming back, because everyone globally recognizes that Pakistan is one of those last few remaining countries where there is still a large return available for VCs, especially in the standard industries like e-commerce, fintech, logistics, etc. We are a 250 million people country. We eat, we pay, and we're increasingly doing it digitally. So that has to create opportunities for investors. They're just still sitting on the sidelines to see how long the stability continues. And I hope it will continue, because inflation has come down from 38% to now under 10%. The cost of borrowing has come down massively as well. And so that is primarily what investors look at, and the brand as well. For example, when there was political upheaval, I would get screenshots of Wall Street Journal from investors who would say, hey, somebody got shot. Hey, somebody was imprisoned. Hey, the government was overthrown. What's happening? So that deters the mental psyche of investors. But fundamentally, tangibly, is what the macroeconomic indicators worries them the most. And if they stay stable, we will see, inshallah, the investment coming back.
Thank you so much, Hamza, for firstly drawing the parallels between the physical and online infrastructure, and then putting into perspective how we have bigger issues to solve as well. It's clear that addressing these barriers isn't just about policy, it's about creating an environment where startups can thrive, scale, and attract sustained investment. And on that note, funding and scaling is exactly what we're going to explore next, which leads us perfectly into our next segment. And to take us through this conversation, I'll hand it over to Nabiha to lead the discussion.
Thank you so much, Abdulzak. To say the least, this has been an incredibly engaging discussion thus far. Thank you so much for being so honest with your opinions. We've spoken about the opportunities and we've discussed the challenges. Let's turn to the core question of sustainability now. Pakistan has seen a considerable rise in venture capital over the past few years, as we spoke earlier, with record-breaking investments fueling the startup ecosystem. But while early stage funding is on the rise, the challenge of scaling remains significant. So first to you, Kulsoom. Pakistan's startup ecosystem has grown significantly with a surge in VC funding, as you were discussing with Myra. And this has driven a wave of new ventures. And I know that I2I has played an incredibly important role in shaping and institutionalizing venture capital in the country. But here's the challenge. Many startups hit what's called the Series B cliff, where securing later stage funding becomes a serious struggle. So first, for those in the audience who might not be familiar with how VC funding works, could you quickly break down the different funding stages? And secondly, what do you think needs to happen for Pakistani startups to go beyond just local successes and actually scale into the regional or even the global sphere?
Yeah. Can I first zoom out for a second? Because I feel like we keep talking about the time where things have been really good, but we're not talking about the present where things aren't as good. So I think it's really important to frame that, while 2020 startups raised $65 million in funding, we jumped 5.5x in 2021 to 350 million. 2022 is 355 million. Again, we talked about that in kind of that inflation period. And that number came down pretty significantly, right? So 2023, the number was $74 million. And then this past year, we closed at about 42.5 million. There's a lot of factors for the reasoning behind that. I think overall, deal sizes were a lot smaller. Obviously, we just had a lot less deals. There was a lot of investor trepidation everywhere. So we just didn't see a lot of investment in a lot of emerging markets, but Pakistan, definitely we saw that. And then there was a push-pull factor, right? So a lot of companies that could be going out to raise a Series A were not doing that because it was more of a time to build than a time to raise from that standpoint. So I think it's first important to kind of take that zoom out perspective. You were asking for kind of like a 101 on how VC stages, the stages of funding. Obviously, like early stage funding is typically that pre-seed, seed stage. Like, when you're first starting out your business, it typically you don't even have like revenue that, or at least that much revenue. That's oftentimes a pre-seed, seed stage. And again, every sector is different. So it's hard for me to give you a 101, but I can give you a little bit of a looser terminology here. Seed stage is like, a little bit more traction, oftentimes, revenue in the door, some sort of validation, proof of concept of what they're building. So you often see seed stage. And again, you'll see the amounts of those rounds typically change. And again, by different sectors, right? So Bazaar obviously has, as you just mentioned, Hamza, a lot of people that you're hiring. It's a business that is quite intensive. So it's going to be raising a lot more money in order to build what they're building, right? A fintech business or something that's maybe more tech first is a little bit lighter in terms of, what they need from a money perspective. So you're typically seeing rounds be a little bit different. Series A is a little bit later, and oftentimes that changes the type of investors and um, the type of things investors look for. At that point, you're really at that point of scale, right? So you've really been building your business. Series A is typically that cliff of being able to raise. Series B, which, Bazaar has, and actually one of the few companies in Pakistan that have raised a B, it really kind of is at, you're kind of off to the races at that growth stage, right? Obviously C, D, and the reason we talk about this graduation, right, is that typically, like when we think about exits, which is typically the big question and for Pakistan, right, is where are exits going to come from? Some sort of liquidation event, right? Something that allows for all these investors that put their money in, the founders also, to be able to see that return come back in a big way. And so that's oftentimes acquisition, mergers. So that's one, listing, which for Pakistan is maybe not the best route from an exit standpoint. But we've seen, acquisitions regionally happen in the market as well. But you won't see that happen at a seed stage, right? You want to see a company that's grown to a certain point where they're able to be a good target for some sort of exit or a good target for acquisition. And so in Pakistan, to the second part of what you were asking, we have a major challenge at every single stage of funding, I have to say right now. So there isn't probably the most amount of people that are investing in the market are probably at that earlier stage, just because that's where the market is. But I will say that the biggest gap right now is probably at that Series A, Series B stage. And Hamza, you can probably speak from your personal experience raising there, but I know this from the companies in our portfolio that have since raised an A are looking to raise a B right now. As much as we talk about Pakistan being a very large market and we talk about digitization, because of the things that are impeding the speed of our digitization, often it means that our addressable market is actually not as big as it could be, right? And so when we think about it, a lot of companies that should want to raise an A or a B, being a Pakistan only company, and obviously Bazaar was able to do that, a few companies that becomes really tricky, is like, how do you actually raise a later stage round of funding and only be a Pakistan only company when, how much can you actually grow in Pakistan alone? This is a big question that we have frequently. And so even with some of our companies in our portfolio, Abi is an example of this, as a fintech has grown to Saudi Arabia, UAE, and also is in Pakistan. That helped position them from and to raise their Series A, now looking at their Series B, being in multi-markets allows you to do that because you're able to show the level of scale and the numbers that you need to be able to raise that amount. The other thing that it helps with, to be honest with you, is a lot of growth stage investors, even early stage investors right now, Pakistan only deals are very, very hard right now. Kind of a much longer discussion about it, but I think that's a really tricky thing when it comes to perception. And so when you're able to diversify that risk by being in multiple markets and doing it in a way that makes sense, even through entering those markets through partnerships, through acquisitions, that allows you to actually build a story that it's not just focused on one solo market risk. And so it's hard to you asked really broad questions, so hopefully I addressed as much as I could, but we can go deeper into anything. And I'm sure, Mabaraz and Hamza might have things to add to it.
Thank you so much. That was indeed a loaded question. The rest of the questions are a little bit more specific, but you did a great job explaining that. And I understand that just explaining what stages of funding are off the top of your head can be hard. You'd be a really good professor. I would want you for my financial economics class.
Oh, thanks.
Moving on, I know that you were a significant part of Shark Tank Pakistan, and earlier in our discussion, we were talking about the mindset shifts that need to come in Pakistan for it to be a successful country. So for many, the show wasn't just about funding startups. It represented a shift signaling that entrepreneurship and investment are becoming more mainstream in Pakistan. And the broader economic impact that it carried was that it brought conversations about business venture capital from boardrooms into living rooms. And they became dinner table discussions in everyday households. So looking ahead, how do you see Shark Tank and similar shows on mainstream media shaping Pakistan's economic future, not just in terms of the tangible outcomes like investment and business growth, but also in shifting mindsets and making entrepreneurship more accessible?
Who's that question directed to?
I think, would you like to take a stab at it?
I'm actually, I'm not a shark. So the question first was actually
Okay.
probably for Rabil, who is a shark, who wasn't able to
Right.
make the panel today. He could probably speak to a lot of this, but I can just speak from an observer standpoint. I know Mabaraz and I
Right.
speak about this a lot, so I'm sure we all could have a conversation about this.
Right.
But we did actually cover Shark Tank and its emergence in Invest Innovate's ecosystem study that just came out. So we talked about that as its impact on culture. I think actually it's not about making business venture capital, to me, something that is digestible and palatable. If anything, to me, what Shark Tank has shown is how wide, to what Mabaraz was speaking about earlier, there's so many businesses that exist outside of the clutches of venture capital that are actually just as worthy of raising funding, and are actually businesses that are, a lot of them have the ability to, be cash flow positive, be profitable, but may not be that type of hockey stick style growth that typically venture capital services as an asset class, right? And so I think that to me is what's really cool about Shark Tank is its spotlighting of all different types of businesses in Pakistan, showing that sense of access. And from a culture standpoint, I feel like we can have a conversation about like what from a maybe criticism perspective, but from a just generally positive perspective, when Shark Tank in the US was going on, my husband does not work in any of this space, right? So he oftentimes, when I've been working in the space for, 13 years, he just would be like, okay, this is what she does. And then when we watched Shark Tank together as an example in the US, he was like, oh, this is what you do. It became a really easy way for him to understand something. And I think that's from a Shark Tank Pakistan perspective. I've seen this in terms of, like my dad, even my dad's in business, but like, so that's a bad example, but other people I know that aren't in this space, really finding it digestible, palatable, really bringing it into what you were mentioning, Nabiha, into these dining room conversations. I think that in itself is really important as an impact, right? Of like, how do we make entrepreneurship something that's a lot more mainstream, where people not only they can see themselves in the people they're seeing on television, and it's not just something where they're dreaming about it in their bedrooms, but actually seeing like potential role models of people that have gone out there and built something. So I think from a general inspiration culture standpoint, I think it's had a big impact from that lens.
Thank you. Someone who's a economic student coming from a physician-dominated family, you've validated me quite a bit. Appreciate it. So we've talked about how important funding and investments are for building a strong ecosystem. Kulsum, Mubaraz, Hamza, I know that you guys have a lot to weigh in on as we shift towards new technologies, emerging trends, policies that are evolving, and global trends that are shifting the future of Pakistan's digital economy. Um, as we move on to the next segment, looking forward to कि सितारों से आगे जहां और भी हैं और भी इश्क इम्तिहान बहुत सारे पाकिस्तान के लिए और भी हैं. Let's look ahead and see what changes in policy and technology will shape Pakistan's digital future and what we need to do to not just meet the curve. I may sound too optimistic there, but hopefully this discussion will prove that I'm right. So first, Mubarak, as Pakistan navigates the future of emerging technologies, I know you spoke about blockchain earlier, but let's look a bit at artificial intelligence or fintech. The right policies will be the difference between enabling innovation and stalling progress. From your perspective, what are the most critical regulatory or legal gaps holding Pakistan's tech-driven growth? Are there specific policy changes, whether in startup regulations, data protection, or investment laws that could create a more enabling environment? And beyond just policy design, what do you think is missing in terms of execution? How can policymakers, entrepreneurs, and investors work together to ensure that these reforms actually translate into real impact on the ground?
No, sure. Thanks. Thank you for that question. I think we touched upon some of it earlier as well, a lot of it earlier as well, actually. But like Hamza, I remember mentioned in this conversation about just paying at restaurants and them incentivizing users to use digital payment methods, right? Now, every policy like that, what you're actually doing is you are creating more data around what me as a consumer is spending on, more data around what the seller is selling. So say a Kirana store or say a restaurant, if their sales are now recorded digitally, they're actually more viable, or it's easier to lend to them as well then, right? So it's all part of it. And so it's policy like this which encourages Pakistanis to transact digitally, I think would be transformative. Now, on that front, we're also building the infrastructure, which we've spoken about. In terms of, and I mean, in terms of new technology like AI and blockchain, we are just, it's not even a conversation, right? Especially for AI. I mean, AI is still early. I would say across for everyone across the world, it's people don't know what to do when regulating AI. Sure, there's the superficial immediate stuff is to somehow regulate deep fakes again, which is very difficult, etc. And this is what the excuse has been given for the PICA amendment, but which is not really what will be done. So AI is just difficult to regulate right now. We don't know enough, but uh, data protection isn't, right? Data protection, we've seen GDPR, we've seen extensive data protection laws across the world, but we still do not have data protection law in Pakistan, which is kind of absurd, right? And whatever drafts that we've seen are have ridiculous consequences, and they always get shot down, especially in consultation with some of the big tech companies as well. And we talk about Meta, Google, etc., and even by local businesses, because it doesn't work for everyone. So I think what we lack is the clarity around on what the reality of Pakistan is, as far as the regulators are concerned. I think there's this ambition to be China, but we lack the infrastructure, the competence, and to be very frank, we've missed that boat really, to have that closed ecosystem and entirely closed internet for our citizens. So we can't do it. But what that is doing is this, like, not accepting that reality is just hampering our progress going forward. I'll just rather speak about crypto a bit more. So let's take that. The biggest fear is that it will enable terrorist financing, and the other fear is that it will enable flight of capital. Now, Pakistanis are the fifth largest real estate owners in Dubai, in UAE. All that capital has already flown out without any crypto regulation being in place, right? On Binance, by a lot of anecdotal but reliable source estimates, Pakistanis transact worth $1.5 billion a year on Binance. That's a significant amount of money. Now, all of this can be taxed, and all of these companies are willing to share the data with the government, with, say, your FBR, put safeguards around it, put rails around how much can be sent out, how much cannot be sent out, what restrictions can be put on their wallets, etc. And Binance being one of them. It's just that we just have this irrational fear, and our go-to action or act whenever we face this irrational fear is to just blanket ban it. कि बस कुछ भी नहीं होगा इसमें. And yeah, so we're suffering. We're not building the next big crypto company when crypto is going to be all the rage. And I mean, we just saw what happened with the Trump coin, which has been like, I think it's unprecedented, largest capital formation in history, where like $74 billion were collected or at least invested over what, 48 hours. That's insane. That's never been done. So we are just, as Pakistanis, we're missing that boat, right? And what we are telling every Pakistani sitting in Pakistan who has this ambition is that either you leave or you break the law. There's no other way. And अगर हमें पता चलेगा कि आपके अकाउंट में पैसे पड़े हुए हैं तो पुलिस पे आपको किडनैप करके ले जाएगी. I don't know if you guys read about that kid in Karachi who got kidnapped by the police, and they took 9 crore rupees from his crypto wallet because somehow they knew about it. But that's being investigated. But my point is, all of this can be taxed instead. All of this can be put, safeguards can be put. We could have better view of how these markets work. It's just that we're just too scared to do it.
That makes
Maybe
sense.
I
I
think
really like
on the
yes.
new technology bit, I would put another of my delusional optimist spin to this. Within a year of generative AI becoming super mainstream, I'll give you an example from Bazaar. Our engineering productivity is up by at least 30-40%. Our design productivity is up by a factor of magnitude. So what that does, if you take a long-term view, the cost of building and digitization is coming down drastically. Technology inherently is a deflationary force. Mubarak mentioned that, yes, electricity is becoming more expensive, but the cost of solar panel per gigawatt hour is coming down. It's been the lowest in history. And so there is a lot of opportunity for us to accelerate our digitization with the new technologies. There's now talk of in the global technology ecosystem that we will start to see one person unicorn. So one entrepreneur who can code, who can design, who can build, who can launch, who can do sales, who can do customer care, and they could potentially build a billion-dollar company that took hundreds, if not thousands, of people previously across the world. So when you see that, and we know that capital constraints are a big deterrent to build technology companies in Pakistan, but if now the cost of building or digitization or engineering becomes drastically lower, I'm quite optimistic that we might actually not need that much capital to build exciting technology companies in and for Pakistan.
That makes sense. And in Gen Z language, I'd like to join your delulu for a bit. I really think that the AI aspect in Pakistan has a lot of potential. And I love the point that you brought up that, we have the problems in Pakistan thanks to the government or the external bodies that govern us. But with that, we also have the problems identified that we can then use generative AI to solve. And hopefully then the world also catches on. So that was, I know that's pretty far ahead and may not happen, but I really hope it happens regardless.
I don't think it's,
So thank
I
you
don't think
so
it's
much
that
for
far
that.
ahead. I think it's happening.
Oh, thank you.
Right? Yeah.
Really? Within the
that's
AI sphere specifically?
I think within AI, like so much is happening on a daily basis. You blink and we're already behind, right, in terms of what's going
Right.
on. And so,
Right.
yeah, like I'm seeing, I agree with Hamza and what he said in terms of generative AI, but like you're seeing like people, like AI is increasing access for everybody, right? Like all of a sudden, people that may not, are much more Urdu first than English, who may not have felt that they had the same access are leveraging these tools, right? So I just think that everything is just moving at such an exponential pace that I don't think it'll be long before things are, we're just further ahead every day. So
I really hope that Pakistan contributes to that global development as it occurs. And just one last question for you, Hamza, particularly. I know that Bazaar's fundraising journey has been a huge milestone for Pakistan's startup ecosystem. Kulsum was mentioning earlier. raising 70 million in a Series B round from investors like Dragoneer and Tiger Global isn't impressive, just impressive. It's basically setting a new benchmark for what's possible for Pakistani entrepreneurs. So, for aspiring entrepreneurs in our audience, what is one biggest lesson from Bazaar's experience in navigating the funding process that you'd like to share that then can become a beacon of hope and guidance?
Yeah, I think first of all, we got extremely lucky, and we were immensely blessed. There are a number of great founders, a number of great startups in Pakistan who can do that well, as good, if not better, than us at Bazaar. What we've learned, though, is it is very important to craft a good story. Um, the general wisdom would say that Pakistan is a risky market, it's a frontier market, there are no exits. But it is very important to craft a story of what you're doing with deep conviction of what you're doing. At the same time, it is also important to be extremely resilient and have very high conviction. Um, we probably, at my last count, we had about 112 different pitches, discussions, conversations, funds that we talked to. Only a handful of them eventually said yes. And so it is also important to have a complete shameless mindset when it comes to fundraising. You have to drop all your agendas, you have to drop all your egos. But that only can happen if you have deep conviction. If you think that, hey, and there are a lot of startup founders that I talk to, for example, they say that, look, I'm going to continue in my plush job, but I'm going to start something on the side. And as soon as I get funding, I will leave that and go and found my own company. I think it doesn't work that way. You have to really get into the deep end and show to investors that you're in it for the long haul. And you've basically burnt all your boats previously, because the conviction is what really matters. And when you're asking for people to put hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars behind you, ultimately, more than the opportunity, the country, the company, it is the person or the founder that they're really investing behind. And so you have to showcase that you are completely in it, with high conviction and for the long haul. Those are some of the lessons that we've learned.
Thank you. मेरा कोई इरादा नहीं था entrepreneur बनने का, लेकिन इस गुफ्तगू के बाद दिल हल्का हल्का चाह रहा है to explore this space further. Thank you so much, Kulthum, Mubarak, and Hamza, for such an engaging discussion. I'd also like to say that with mentors like you, I truly feel like Iqbal's words, गए दिन के तन्हा था मैं अंजुमन में, यहाँ मेरे राज़दां और भी हैं. Your insights have given us a lot to reflect on, to say the least, and they will serve as a guiding light as we continue our journey towards, inshallah, a better Pakistan. With that, I'll hand over to Abdullah, our Director of Communications and Public Relations, and Lena, who will be leading us through the question and answer session. Our audience would love to interact with you.
All right. Sorry. Thank you, Nabiha. We've covered a lot of ground so far, and I'm sure our audience is eager to dive deeper into some of the key themes we've discussed today. So for the next 25 or 30 minutes, Lena and I will take turns posing questions from our audience to our esteemed panelists. We have some fantastic questions lined up, so we'll get right into it. One thing I should note is that if your question was already answered in the moderated segment, we're going to move on to the other questions, and I hope you got the answer you were looking for. So, starting off with the first question from Atif Khan: can digital transformation in government departments be scaled and sustained without a shift in mindset among technocrats and bureaucrats to understand how it works?
Mubarak, you kind of started talking about this earlier. Do you want to
Yeah,
tackle
sure.
the mindset
I mean,
shift?
at the end of the day, technology and say digitization is a means to an end, right? So as long as, and I think these technocrats are pretty clear on what needs to be done and why it needs to be done. So if someone can make the process as simple and address those needs, then why not? But they would need to be on board. I don't think it will be entirely top down. It has to say address their problems and address the way they want to get something done. Obviously, they'll also have to it can't have any malicious intentions behind why they don't want to do it. But yeah, other than that, if you can think of them as a user and don't think of them as, say, government needs to do XYZ because we think that's how it should be done.
All right, for the next question, this comes from Hafiz Mohammed. Why are VCs and angel investors in Pakistan reluctant to invest in deep tech, while those abroad are more inclined, given its potential for billion-dollar companies?
I don't think VCs are, I don't know where that came from, but I don't know if VCs are reluctant to invest. I do think that deep tech investors, you want investors who are specialist investors, and I don't want to speak for any of my colleagues in the space, but I've invested in an AI company. And so, I don't want to say that, people aren't investing in deep tech. I haven't seen enough good deep tech deals, to be honest with you, that are VC investment ready. That being said, I also think that for companies in Pakistan that are building deep tech companies, they should try to have more specialist deep tech investors on their cap table. And those, for a lot of us who are, fund managers in Pakistan, most of us are, maybe we do, maybe they're secretly hiding their deep tech expertise, but like most of us are more generalist, fintech, focused on kind of the problems that are there. But I think none of us are opposed to investing in deep tech if we see a deal that's good. So I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but I would say that we've often been investing in like some of the largest problems that we're seeing in the market. That being said, like we just invested in an AI company. So that is building in Pakistan for the world. So we're not opposed to it.
All right. Next question. This is from Aliha Salman from George Mason University. What is the state of artificial intelligence in Pakistan, and how can young entrepreneurs like those in henna artistry and other fields thrive in the tech age?
I think Mabar has already kind of addressed AI, and Hamza did as well. Like, I think people are leveraging a lot of generative AI tools already in the market. We're definitely seeing, there's a few companies in the Bay Area that are hiring in Pakistan for their AI first companies. So we're definitely seeing a skill set being developed. Yeah, and to Mabar's, if you want to add from or you've already talked about the regulation standpoint, right? So there isn't really much happening in this space. So there hasn't really been a framing of AI, but I do think that people are leveraging all the tools that are out there, and especially with a lot of open source LLMs, I think it presents an opportunity for Pakistanis to build on top of that. So I think there's a huge amount of opportunity there in this space, and definitely seeing, I mean, the company that we invested in is in the SaaS integration space and is actually thinking about agentic AI, but seeing how, like, with the issue of siloed data with agentic AI, like how can their integration technology actually help agentic AI speak to one another in a way that pushes the space forward faster. So I think the thing is also thinking about, like, what are the problems that you're addressing or the problems that are coming up within the AI space that offer a potential for you to build a solution that's different. I think one thing that I find interesting when I've looked at a few AI deals is they're pretty much all quite repetitive with each other. And so I haven't really seen that many, I don't know, Mabaris, maybe you have. I haven't seen that many brand new AI deals where my argument can't be that OpenAI can just build this or like someone else can do this. But and everyone, by the way, is building an agentic AI, which is getting a ton of money, but it's also a super crowded space. So what I would say as advice to people that want to build an AI is like really figure out, like, what is it that you're building? What is the problem that you're addressing and why is it urgent? And why can you do it? What is the moat that you're building with that someone in like are part of these very large companies can't just do tomorrow, right? And I think that's the tricky part of this space, is that there's a ton of money in it, but also every day that we blink, AI investors have moved to a new part of the space. So I think being able to build something that's kind of at the new forefront and kind of almost staying ahead of the trend, I think is kind of the key here.
Also, just to add to that, I mean, I'm seeing a lot of legal tech companies come up in Pakistan because of AI. A lot of people building those wrappers. They're training their models on Pakistani legal data, like court precedents and our legislation. So I think in terms of purely Pakistani solutions for AI, I don't think there's a whole lot happening right now for Pakistanis, because Pakistanis generally don't spend much on software anyway. But people who are working in AI sitting in Pakistan are working on global solutions anyway, which I think is the right approach given where we are in AI. But as far as adoption is concerned, and I think Hamza spoke about this earlier as well, but even on a more basic level, like a friend of mine, he has some salespeople who send emails and they just can't write in English really well. So they would instruct chat GPT in Urdu saying कि मुझे एक email लिखनी है, उसमें मुझे ये sales pitch देनी है, ये उसका brochure है वगैरह, and way better now. So yeah, that level up is quite, like, it's quite fascinating to see.
Mhm.
Thank you. This question is for Hamza. What key metrics do global investors focus on when evaluating Pakistani startups? How can early stage founders better position themselves to attract top-tier investors?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's the size of the market. So venture investors are looking for outsized returns because their risk appetite is very large. So when they put $1, they expect 10 in terms of return over a certain time period. So if your opportunity set today is where you are at X, the market has to be much larger for you to, if you really perform, and they could see the dollar value go up. Second is a strong indication of a product market fit. The metrics that give you a product market fit are, first of all, growth, engagement, especially on the consumer side or a small merchant side, how engaging your product is, how often do the users come back, and what is the retention like? So especially the cohort levels, if you acquire a user today, how many of those users are still with you over a 6 or 12-month period? And third, if you're able to do it profitably. So if you have a high retention, you have good growth, and you have decent unit economics. It doesn't have to be net profit, but at least a unit economic level. If you're making money on an order basis or a service basis or a customer basis, those are some of the things that give confidence to investors that the product or solution or the problem that you've picked to go after has some viability and acceptance in the market for you to do that. So those are some of the metrics. And then, but I think most importantly, the other thing that investors, especially the early stage, look at is the quality of the team. So how good you are as a founder, and a founder market fit is a real concept. So are you really the person to go after the problem that you're going after? So if you, for example, are very creative, a design startup would make sense, and probably a logistics startup might not make sense. And second is the quality of your team, especially the early team. Are you able to, as a leader or a founder, draw great talent or people to believe in your mission? So for example, if you have an early team, they have good profiles, that's also a good check to say, okay, look, these are really talented people who believed in your vision, believed in your company, believe in the promise, and they left their plush jobs or good universities to come and work for you. That's a really good signal to investors, say, hey, there is something really going on here.
All right. Thank you, Hamza. This next question will be for Lena. Let's see. Sorry, Lena, I said your name. I think next one will be for Mubarak. How many it's kind of following up from Hamza's question. Many startups struggle with follow-on funding beyond seed rounds. What policy or structural changes could improve late-stage funding access?
We just need new funds. So any policy that incentivizes or say brings out new funds or enables entrepreneurial finance for that, I think that would work. What has worked in other jurisdictions, say Egypt, for example, is a fund of funds which say seeds new funds, can seed existing global funds. So say if they go out to a MENA-based fund and give them say $1 million and say you have, for this $1 million in commitment, you have to invest 2 in Pakistan or 3 in Pakistan, or say did that with Egypt. So for every dollar that the government invested, they got $6 to $7 of they capitalized $6 to $7 of private investment and foreign investment. So it was fairly successful. And I think something along those lines, along with enabling LPs, unlocking more private capital in Pakistan, allowing insurance companies in Pakistan to put money in PE and VC funds, allowing local LPs to invest in foreign funds that are investing in Pakistan as well, allowing local funds to have US dollar accounts, like Pakistan registered funds to have US dollar accounts of foreign LPs, so that any devaluation does not affect whatever capital they've committed or it's right there. Currently, we have this irrational double taxation on local private equity or VC registered funds. So we need to remove
Unless
that.
you're part of a special technology zone.
Even
Mubars.
that is not fully done yet, by the way, Cal. Like
I
it's
know. Yeah.
ridiculous. That's why all funds that are investing in Pakistan are not registered in Pakistan. Pakistan has like I
2
2 to
2 or
3
3.
active
Yeah.
funds and like 8 or 9 total registered funds. By comparison, India has 1,700, right? So it does not make any sense. So this has been a colossal market failure, and I think government intervention is required.
Can I add to that as someone who's a fund manager? I think that one of the issues when you look at VC funding slowing down for Pakistan in the last 2 years, that's a lot of it was international VC activity. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is that all of the fund managers in Pakistan, for the most part, I mean, some of us they're raising like their second funds right now, but we are all first-time fund managers, right? And so all of us were in the middle of either raising our first fund and closing it or in the beginning of raising our second fund. And so what people don't realize is that the funding activity isn't just international VC slowdown, it's also the slowdown of us raising our funds in order to deploy capital into these companies, right? So when you're having the global macro issues, Pakistan's macro issues, that doesn't just impact startups raising, it impacts funds that are raising, which for us, it was, I mean, I probably have spoken to my therapist about it like a million times because it was like the hardest year of my life was closing our fund. But it slowed down, deployment, right? Which meant that when you look at what happens when you have international VC activity slowing down with India, you have at least a local ecosystem that can support the startups that are growing there. Pakistan just doesn't have that, right? We only have a few of us, like a handful of us. And most of us had that slowdown happen that impacted us, which then impacted the startups that we're raising as well.
Thank you so much, everyone. That was an excellent way to close our Q&A. Thank you to our audience for such engaging questions and to our panelists for their candid and thoughtful responses. To wrap up today's discussion and share some closing reflections, I'll now hand it over back to Myra.
Thank you, Lena. Thank you so very much, Kulsoom, Hamza, and Mubayez, for your invaluable presence and profound insights today. Your contributions were not only enlightening, but also deeply inspiring. And I can tell you that this was one of the most enjoyable events for all of us. Your vision, expertise, and unwavering passion for Pakistan's digital and entrepreneurial future have reminded us of the boundless potential that lies ahead for our nation. Today's discussion marked the second session of the Rethinking Pakistan Forum and stands as a powerful testament to Pakistan's undeniable capacity for innovation and progress. The exchange of ideas on digitalization, technology, and entrepreneurship was more than just a conversation. It was a call to action for all of us as students. We hope the insights shared today will resonate far beyond this event, sparking meaningful dialogue, debate, and ultimately policy reform that drives Pakistan forward. I would also like to take an opportunity to thank the Rethinking Pakistan Forum team for their dedication and hard work in organizing this event. Special thank you to Abuzar and Nabiha for co-moderating today's discussion with me. Thank you also to Abdullah and Lena for hosting it so seamlessly. And above all, as always, thank you to Arif, the president of the PSA Coalition and the RPF chair, whose tireless efforts behind the scene brought this vision to life. Thank you for believing in this as much as I did and working so hard with me on it. The Rethinking Pakistan Forum remains committed to hosting thought-provoking discussions with Pakistan's foremost thinkers, practitioners, and policymakers, ensuring that our voices as students are heard and amplified. Thank you all once again for joining us today, and we look forward to welcoming you at future RPF events soon. Have a wonderful day. Allah Hafiz and Pakistan Zindabad.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank
All
you
right,
all.
guys. Okay.
Lovely seeing you.